I'm a composer and performer, but I do sort of retreat quite often into the British Library archives, which is how I got to meet people like Cheryl and Ian Rawls and others. And so I'd like to share with you a few things that I found, starting with this. The man who bought an echo. Echo is a capricious being whose caprices are not easily divined. Now, those were the words of Randolph Radeau in 1872, writing in The Wonders of Acoustics. And fellow audiophiles and musicians in the audience will know this feeling when you spot a rare import or a piece of sound technology or a musical instrument, and you become completely intoxicated in that moment with the musical possibilities on offer. And you kind of get that feeling that there's just that one purchase between you and sonic nirvana, and you can have it even though you can't afford it at any cost. And this has happened to me too many times to mention. Here's one. This was in about 1990, this particular one. When I spotted one of these in Loop magazine, The Copycat, which is a beautiful British compact tape echo machine, and it had multiple tape heads to create the multiple echo. And it was invented in about 58, 59 by this chap, Charlie Watkins. Very interesting. Charlie went to Italy in about 1958 and saw the most extraordinary thing. He saw some performers out on stage making the most exotic, spacey echoes he'd ever heard. And they were doing it with two very, very, and I say, like NASA expensive for the time, expensive reel-to-reel tape recorders. So he thought, I might be in Italy and I might not be able to afford that, but I want it. So he went home and he built this wonderful thing, the Copycat, which is a very cheap, compact version that ordinary mortals like me can afford. And what a wonderful thing it is. And actually using the Copycat is a bit like riding a galloping horse. It always gets a bit carried away with itself and you get lots of feedback problems, but I still love it. But sometimes for convenience, like many fellow musicians, I go completely disembodied, if you like, and I get my exotic reverb and echoes from software, like this opulent ballroom here at the touch of a button. Now, people have always been interested in exotic echoes, and of course, before the likes of Charlie, it wasn't that easy to experience an echo. You actually had to visit it yourself, which of course, going back to these European tours, is what people used to do. They used to visit wonders like the heptaphonic echo, and what you'd do is you'd go and visit this site, you'd clap your hands, and you'd hear the echo back. Or better still, you'd get a gun, because that's a really good way to experience an echo. You'd shoot your pistol in the air, and actually, seriously, as an acoustician, I have to say, gunshots are brilliant for experiencing echoes because they give a very loud, very clean impulse. And I used to work as an acoustic engineer many moons ago, and in fact, around the time I bought the Copycat, and we actually had a pistol in the drawer with a letter from the Home Office. That's what all acousticians, all self-respecting ones, had in those days. Anyway, yeah, so you'd fire a pistol and you'd hear the echo back. But The Wonders of Acoustics has this strange story, it might be apocryphal, about a man who went to Italy, like Charlie, but in the 19th century, and he too experienced the most exotic, exquisite echo he'd ever heard. So he decided he needed it. He needed to buy it. But you can't buy an echo. So what he did was, a very wealthy man, he bought the house that made the echo, and he dismantled it brick by brick, took it back to England, to his stately home, rebuilt it in the grounds, and there was the wonderful day when he went out with his pistol into the house and fired the gun. And the echo didn't come back. Something had happened in transit. Maybe it was the atmospherics, the forest around it. Something had happened. Echoes are capricious things. It's not known whether the second shot created the echo when he fired at his own brain. So, as you probably gather, I'm fascinated by some of the wonders that are lurking in the British Library archives and beyond. And that's because I'm actually a composer and roboticist. And so my stuff is odd because it's digital, but as you can probably gather, my aesthetic and my sort of interests are at the same time a bit of a throwback. And this is something that I've sort of grown in confidence about because, the old idea I had was that there was some disruptive technology, phonography or laptopery, that sort of created a discontinuity, like that was how we did it then, and this is how we do it now. But actually, when you go back through time, you realise that musicians have always had the same sort of desires and have been seeking the same kind of thrills as they were here. Incidentally, I should just point this out because it's so good. This is actually the champion chopper, and his act was to do this. And he was very popular in the Egyptian halls in Piccadilly, which I'm sure many of you have heard about. And so I haven't got long, so I'm just going to give you two very, very swift examples that I just think are really out there. Cyborg music, a subject close to my heart. Musicians have always been consummate cyborgs. It's pretty obvious if you, I don't know, just listen to chart music, if you ever have to listen to chart music. And, you know, scarcely any singer now who's sort of, you know, on MTV, I suppose, scarcely any of them are you hearing without it being enhanced to the nth degree by auto-tune. You can tune it to the nth degree. You can even hit notes that are beyond your normal range. But of course, people have always wanted to augment their skills, you know, be cyborgs. And I'm sure many of you are familiar with this particular cyborg, Farinelli, the finest castrato of the 18th century. And yes, the castrati were cyborgs, because what were they doing? As adolescents, the technology of the time, the surgeon's knife, was applied to them to augment their vocal range. And they had this amazing power and this soaring, exquisite voice that could reach the male and the female range. So I see a continuity between Farinelli and the people, the sort of divas who are playing around with auto-tune. But actually, what I found lovely in the newspaper archives was actually, it's not just the castrati who are dabbling with the surgeon's knife. Now, this is close to my own heart because I play the piano and I have quite small hands. In the 19th century, piano music sort of took a swerve and got fiendishly difficult, very large stretches. And again, it was about reach. What happened was there was a small but nevertheless persistent fashion to cut the webbing between certain fingers to get the stretch. Okay, one other example, because we haven't got long. The bird fancier's delight. Now, this is a thing I've researched extensively, and if you go on the BBC website, there's a little Radio 4 documentary with more about this. But very briefly, another painting from the 18th century. This is by Chardin, a woman at her amusements. And yeah, she's got a little canary in a cage, and she's got a little pipe organ on her lap, and that organ is a serenette, is a close-up of a serenette. Now, the serenette is a beautiful little machine that uses these punch card type devices. Oh, sorry, these pin type devices, like a pin barrel organ, to be programmed. And this particular one was playing gavottes and minuets and all the sort of popular French tunes of the day. And now, what's interesting is if you go back and look at this woman, she's actually playing to the bird. She is training the bird to play these tunes. Now, the British Library is absolutely jam-packed with information on this, and it's actually settled a few scores with me and ornithologists who say, no, this didn't actually happen, but the evidence is in the library for the reading. Basically, what you did was, as treaties like Bickers and Bush in the library tell you, and what you do is you'd find a male bird and you'd isolate it from its own kind, so it wouldn't pick up its own song, and then you'd put this poor isolate into a cage, and you'd cover it over. And, you know, one way you might do it is every morning lift the cover off the bird so it thinks it's dawn, give it a juicy worm. Bickers and Bush says the blackbirds really won't do this without a worm. And you play your tune, and if you're lucky, over time, your bird will learn the tune. And this is how people had domestic music at home before the phonograph, because you'd invite your friends round, instead of putting on the iPod, you'd lift the cover, and the bird would sing the tune. Now, it was such a sort of widespread thing, this. I don't know whether it was very widespread, but it was certainly persistent. It only started to peter out as the phonograph ended up in middle-class homes. It was so persistent, this, that there were actually books printed that were very, very popular, like The Bird Fancier's Delight, which had many, many editions, and the sort of authorship is very murky, who wrote it first. And these were tunes, almost like, you know, instead of putting on your record collection, you train your bird in a favoured tune. And these tunes were fine-tuned for birds. So there were ones that worked for the linnet and ones that worked for, I don't know, the thrush. And so this was how people got music in the home. And it's worth pointing out about the word record. So deep is this connection between birdsong and the modern recording age that the word record is a bird-rearing word. So re, again, cordi, from the heart. And it was the idea that a bird had come into its song when it could record, when it could sing it from its heart. And I'm actually a recorder player, and of course a recorder is in imitation of a bird and possibly even used to lure a bird. Little sort of addendum to that. Now, I put encryption, but maybe this is just privacy, so you can tell me. Yeah, of course, when the phonograph came along, 1877, the first sort of public demonstrations, people got very exercised about many things, and one of them, interestingly, was one we concern ourselves with greatly today, which was privacy. And it was pointed out in Scientific American that with the foil, the first phonograph used tin foil, that actually this was great because a person could send a message on foil in the post to another person, a receiver, and a clerk would never ever transcribe it, so it could be top secret. And in 1890, in fact this is in the library as well, in some papers from Aldershot, Colonel Gouraud, who was Edison's agent in London and a military veteran himself, took this idea of privacy one step further, and he said, how about making phonographs as military secret messaging systems? It's very simple. Take the mandrel, the spindle in the middle, and send them out with the army in very odd shapes, and then make phonographs with very odd-shaped bores so that you have to have the phonograph and the spindle matching, and then only the intended receiver can get it. Now, if that's not a precursor of sort of digital encryption, I don't know what isn't, but I don't know whether it was actually done, but I just love that story. I am going to play a short piece, but before I do that, I just wanted to say that in the bar, also in the cafe outside, with Colin Utley, we're going to actually be using the phonograph and inviting you to have your own voice recorded on wax. And I'd recommend doing that because it's a bit like, I love Tim Hitchcock's talk in the morning because I'm very into small data and the particular and the peculiar. And it was actually only playing with the phonograph and recording my own sounds that I started to realise, exactly as we have found with photography, that many of our notions of the sort of Victorian vocal sensibility were actually hearing sort of artefacts of the technology, and you'll know what I mean when you try to enunciate into the machine. And also the fact that it was a big deal getting your voice recorded in the right up until the 1890s. And so, people kind of put on the equivalent of their telephone voice at the time. Very briefly, before I go into a piece, there's some beautiful things that have come out of this weekend, which Adam Tovall sent me, which is some more sort of everyday recordings where people sort of had the chance to make a phonograph recording or a very early shellac recording in some cases because they were doing something, like emigrating. And I love them because, they point up this thing that I feel very strongly about feeling an affinity between now and then. And when you hear these voices, apart from the artefacts, some of the aspects of this felt like they could have been recorded yesterday. So here's a chap about to emigrate to New Zealand.
As I came to Bournemouth the first time, I really didn't know what was being seen here. And as soon as I arrived and found this exceptional hospitality on the part of the dear Brilliants.
Oh, sorry, that's a different record. That's somebody talking to the Brilliants, a family who he found very hospitable. But what I love about those recordings is they're just sort of like on the edge. It's like you're sort of looking at the sort of edge of the event horizon, and you get your sort of first glimpse of the sort of, the earliest glimpse of a sort of humanity of the human voice from earlier on. And it relates to this song that I'm going to do, if my automata have survived all this switching about. Now, this song is actually itself using a facsimile of a slightly later recording, actually one from the Second World War, which I found really moving, which was actually a recording made by a father to his daughter while he was out in Europe.
Hello, sunshine. It's been so long, and I can't wait to see you. For we're going to have such fun we will go fishing. And I'm not like Mummy, for I like tadpoles and frogs and creepy crawly things. And we will go on the buses. You will like that, I know. Tadpoles and frogs and creepy crawly things. Tadpoles and frogs and creepy crawly things. And we will go on the buses. You will like that, I know.
Equestrians, tumblers, women, girls and boys, blue-breeched, pink-vested, with high towering plumes. All movables of wonder from all parts are here. The horse of knowledge and the learned pig, the stone-eater, the man that swallows fire, giants, ventriloquists, the invisible girl, the bust that speaks and moves its goggling eyes. The waxwork, clockwork, all the marvellous craft of modern Merlins, all out of the way, far-fetched, perverted things, all freaks of nature, all Promethean thoughts of man, his dullness, madness, and their feats all jumbled up together to compose a parliament of monsters.
Thank you.